Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for January 21st, 2020. Hope everybody had a great holiday, Martin Luther King Day yesterday. Item number 1, if we could call the roll.
Councilmember Brennan.
Here.
Councilmember Lehman.
Here.
Mayor Mars.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras.
Here.
Thank you all. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 3, are there any changes to the agenda, Mr. Reynolds?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Okay. Councilors?
I make a motion to approve agenda.
Okay, I have a motion
Second.
and a second to approve the agenda as stated. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4, consent agenda. Are there any changes, Mr. Reynolds?
No, sir.
Thank you. Councilor Brennan?
I'd like to pull 4D2.
I'm sorry,
4D2.
I didn't hear, 4D2?
Is in dog.
Mr. Lehman, Councilor Lehman.
4D1.
4D1. Others? Seeing none? Counselor Lehman?
Motion to approve the consent agenda as modified.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Before we vote on the modified consent agenda, we would read it into the public record. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. These are consent agenda items for January 21st of 2020. 4A1 approves the minutes from the January 7th, 2020 meeting. 4A2 designates the Shakopee Valley News as the official newspaper for the city of Shakopee in 2020 and designates the city website as the official notice and advertisement venue for transportation project bids in 2020. 4A3 adopts the 2020 City Council norms of behavior. 4A4 adopts resolution number R2020-00H8, which honors outgoing SMSC Chairman Charlie Vig for his service to the SMSC and area and proclaims Monday, January 27th as Charlie Vig Day in Shakopee. 4B1 adopts resolution number R2020-005, which accepts a donation of $20,000 from Roar Malting Company to be used towards the purchase of fire rescue tools and equipment. 4C1 approves the suspension of park hours to allow for overnight use of the youth building on February 7th and 14th of 2020. 4C2 approves a partnership with Edge Tech Hockey to open a pro shop at the Ice Arena. 4E1 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with WSB Incorporated for the Cretex Forteras traffic study. 4E2 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with AE2S to perform a feasibility study for the West End lift stations projects, which are Sewer TAC 24 TAC 001 and Sewer TAC 24 TAC 002. 4E3 approves the purchase of 3 John Deere 1570 mowers from Kibble Equipment in an amount not to exceed $24,660. 4E4 adopts resolution number R2020-003, which receives a feasibility report and calls for a public hearing for the 2020 full depth pavement reconstruction project, which is CIP TAC 20 TAC 004. 4E5 authorizes the execution of the contract agreement with Shadywood Tree Experts for the 2020 tree pruning work. 4E6 adopts resolution number R2020 TAC 004, which approves plans and orders the advertisement for bids for the 2020 sewer service lateral pipe rehabilitation project, which is Sewer TAC 20 TAC 003. And 4E7 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with Barr Engineering Company for the Northwest Shakopee Stormwater Structure Improvements Phase 1, which is Project Storm TAC 22 TAC 001.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I have a motion on the table and a second for the modified consent agenda. It's been read into the public record. There would be no further discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Item number 5, now I'd like to call on any resident citizen that would like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record on an item not on the agenda. Seeing none then, we would move on to item number 6, which is business removed from consent. And we would start with 4D1, submission of a redevelopment grant to the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. Mr. Councilor Lehman.
Mayor, I asked them to remove this because this is more tax dollars going to private development, and I'm opposed to that.
Okay. In reviewing this, this requires no money from the city. Is that correct, Mr. Kursky?
Mayor and council, that's correct.
Okay. Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve resolution R 2020-006 to submit a redevelopment grant to the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development and to accept same grant upon award.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Contreras. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Next item off of consent is 4D2, which is a support of the creation of the Scott County Cultural Consortium and funding through the Heritage Partnership Program. Councilmember Brennan.
I have a number of things. I would like to hear what the cultural corridor is. I know what it is, but I'd like to have it explained to the general population. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the public in the last couple days, so I think it's a good opportunity to talk about that. We are creating a cultural consortium, and I want to know what the purpose of that is, and then also the grant that is being applied for.
Thank you. Mr. Kursky.
Mayor and council, so these are the proposed partners: Scott County Historical Society, the Scott County Three Rivers Park District, City of Shakopee, and the Shakopee Minnetonka and Sioux community. So the Scott County History Group is going to take the lead on this, and so will be submitting to the state a grant for, I believe it's $100,000 to work on this partnership. There'll be, a contract that will be drawn up. And you'll see in a minute, most or all of these parties control real estate or resources within the proposed district. So this is the area that it would cover. So basically it's from the, get this to work. Come on. Oh, there we go. From just the other side of the historic Home Street Bridge all the way down to the landing, which is controlled by Three Rivers. It's roughly 3 miles, and so within that area, you have the Old Home Street Bridge, which is owned by Scott County. You have city-owned property in Hubert Park, the area adjacent to Hubert Park, the area we just acquired, that's the old marina, and then you have Memorial Park and some other areas around there, and then the Shakopee Minnetonka and Sioux community owns a significant amount of real estate along the river. So what this would be is a group that would look at common theme and common messaging for the area, for both historic resources, so that includes buildings, but also archaeological resources and history in the community. And that was part of the Parks Master Plan. You can see on this image down below, there were ideas that came out of it. This group would be responsible for fleshing those ideas out and making sure that, for instance, at the landing, the same story is told there as it would be told along the trail. So specifically, they would work on, with the city, on the new potential redevelopment of the park. And this is a better picture, but there are some trails that will be out of the floodplain, so signage and imaging that would be consistent along the entire length of the 3 miles. So The SMSC would have similar signage to whatever the city would have, and as would the Three Rivers Park District. And then this is Memorial Park. Again, you can see here, this is an idea which you'll see again, but a uniform, whatever it ends up being, kiosk style that would be used not only by the city, but also by Three Rivers, Scott County, and the SMSC. These are just some imaging. This is Memorial Park. This is currently a grass area that's in the parking lot. So this would be turned into more of an interpretive center. Again, you can see here's the concept signage that would be used throughout with a map and information. And again, this group would be responsible making sure that message is the same throughout all the different properties. And then again, this is actually on the landings property, but any signage that goes here, so when you start at the landing all the way to the bridge, it would have a similar signage. So contrary to what people have read, we're not closing Memorial Park. The only major changes that will be here is there's an existing playground that would be relocated, which is in the back here, along with the sand volleyball courts, which would be removed. That area would be returned more to a natural area. The activities would occur down around the pond area, and there'd be some more nature playgrounds and benches and things that would not be penetrating the ground. As most of you know, if we look at this image, the dotted areas are confirmed mounds, and so Memorial Park basically is really a pretty large mound. It goes beyond what you see there today. Mr. Lilhog, as part of the potential to rebuild this bridge, has done a lot of work already in this area, along with the drainage for the Amazon water area, and these mound locations are pretty accurate. And so I think our attempt in this area is not to disturb any more of this ground. So again, you'll notice the signage would not be penetrating the ground, but would be sitting above the ground. So this group, again, would be making sure the historical facts are accurate and the same themes are throughout the project.
Question is, if this were to go forward here and nothing's really before us tonight, but would I be able to walk from the old Home Street Bridge all the way to the landing on a trail?
Mayor and Council, you can do that today. A lot of that trail, however, is in the floodplain and is probably underwater 4 or 5 months out of the year. The plan is, if this all over time gets developed, that there'll be a separate trail, which I think shows better in this image.
There we go.
That would be out of the water, which is up in this area. This is basically today the area that floods. The water comes up to this general area on the amphitheater, and it has never really flooded the playground. So the idea would make sure that the new walkways are above the area that constantly gets flooded. And then I'm sure you've all seen the governor's recommended funding on the state side for redoing this. One of the things we're looking at is creating more natural river edge that would allow this to more naturally floods.
So we don't lose another 40 feet over the next
Correct.
30, 40 years.
That was the other amazing thing. We did look at some historic photographs about these various areas to see over the past 40 or 50 years how much the river's really taken back.
Councilor Brennan?
It's on my understanding that we'll be bringing other groups into the conversation, like the Heritage Society and the veterans organizations, as we progress along the development of that. I would also like to make sure that there's a city council liaison on the consortium when things are being discussed.
Yes, again, this is, Mayor and Council, this is just to apply for the grant. I think that we've only had one meeting Mr. Reynolds was at, along with some members of the SMSC, Scott County, and the History Society, just when this idea came about, that it really would make sense to kind of manage this, and I'm sure we'll have a much more formal agreement. One of the things we've been looking at longer term, and Mr. Lilihog's kind of addressing some of this as part of their archaeological research down around Amazon, but that'll become a National Register district, and there are other properties, particularly the Schroeder House that the city's acquired, that at some point could go on the National Register. So we might end up with a cultural resource area that's all on the National Register, including a lot of the archaeological resources.
Okay. Councilor Whiting?
I just want to echo a little bit of what Counselor Brennan had talked about, and I know this is just for the grant, but the Shakopee Heritage Society has been raising money and trying to get the city and partners to talk about similar and same format signs for over 10 years and investing already in the park system. So I want to see them at the table. When this rolls, I want to see them in that consortium. So I just want to make sure that that's noted.
And really, the purpose of this partnership consortium here is to get in a position to apply for a grant. Is that correct?
Mayor and Council, that's correct. And there are other grants that this consortium could apply for signage and other things that come out of the state.
Counselor Lehman?
A couple of questions, Mayor. First, I absolutely like the idea of putting kiosk and signage in to talk about some of the features that you're looking at. The Schrader Brickyard is one of them, the kiln, some of these other features that we have. My question is, that seems like a pretty small undertaking. If there's 4 partners, that could be done pretty easy, I think. It's all the other stuff above and beyond that costs lots of money that I'm opposed to. So in looking at what's before us, my real question is, at the bottom of the resolution, it says the mayor and administrator are hereby authorized to execute such agreements that are necessary to implement the project on behalf of the city. So I guess I'm looking for what exactly is the project that is before us tonight?
Mayor and Council, the project is the forming of this consortium. There's no development signage program or anything. It's just forming that coalition to act as a body to come up with kind of universal signage, history, whatever that's going to go in this area. Every group, for instance, if the Scott County wants to do something on the bridge, they would likely be paying for that out of their own money. Same is true with the SMSC. Anything on their property. I think the thought was if they have a uniform, when you go down that walk, it's not 4 or 5 different experiences, it's one experience over that 3 miles.
One experience as in signage?
Signage, and I think
think-
interpretation of what that history is. There's, probably 6 or 7 variations on what some of the history is, but coming up with really what it is that everyone can agree on and doing signage and interpretation that conforms with that.
Well, I think you've got a lot of different history aspects down there that you can't make into one. You have the tribal history, you have the settler history, you have,
Shakopee's history.
Shakopee's history, you get the old bridge footings in the river. I think that was a term bridge at one point.
And Mayor and Council, that's the point, to have one group that agrees on all of those different histories, but has it delivered in a similar fashion, whether that's through agreed upon virtual reality, signage, whatever it is, there's an agreed upon format and messaging.
So in this resolution, we're not expressly giving the city administrator and the mayor the authority to spend millions upon millions of dollars.
No, this is strictly to apply to this as a partner. And actually, we're not applying to this. The Scott County is going to be the lead administrator on this grant. We're just
Mr.
a
Reynolds.
signature.
And that is boilerplate language, as I put out to everyone earlier today. I think if you'll go back and look at everything we do when we apply to grants or any other thing, it gives the individuals involved the ability to actually do what the overall resolution is looking to accomplish. As I also pointed out, that neither I or the mayor have the authority to do anything more than we have to do today. And I don't have the ability to spend $1 million. I don't have the ability to do anything with land at all. All of that stuff has to come to council. So just to make sure that that's clear with everyone.
Okay. Counselor Whiting?
You had mentioned that this is the point where forming that consortium. And so this would be the point where I would think that we would want to add the Shakopee Heritage Society on that list to keep them at the table. I know you talked about adding them at a later date, but if they're not on the list in the beginning, they're going to be aced out at every time. And they're the people that have been doing the work and collecting the history and running into the same problems with whose idea is what history, and we've had issues with that too. So I'd like to have them at the table in the beginning.
Mr. Reynolds?
There'll be many partners that'll be at the table. This is a consortium. These are actually the individuals that have land value stakes except for the History Society, the Historical Society, and the reason is because they are actually the grant purveyors and the overall coordinator of everything. So there are going to be a lot of partners involved, but the consortium itself are these particular individuals, these particular groups.
Counselor Lehman.
If it's any consolation, when we get to that point, I'm going to nominate Counselor Whiting to serve as the liaison to this group. Got a background in the history, so, and the Shakopee heritage.
Thank you for that, but we'll wait for the mayor to appoint that.
Well, I think Counselor Whiting is trying to get a seat at the table for the Heritage Society, and if that, you know, this consortium here of those named partners, and then, you know, as they get a blue ribbon committee together and have the Heritage Society at that table, and then any overall, we will probably, as this moves forward, then have a liaison. This is pretty important stuff. It was in the comp plan. Some of this stuff was in our Park and Trail master plan. The idea to bring history back and rediscover that all, because the history in our community across many different facets is very rich. We have a story to tell. We haven't been very good at telling that story. I think that's what draws residents. And Ken, I also think it can draw visitors. We talk about holding power for the 8+ million visitors we get to the major attractions during the summer, and maybe they spend a night and maybe they learn some of our community's history. I know when I could go to a community, and if I go to like a Valley Fair in a community, I'm certainly gonna stay overnight, and I'm gonna learn, one day is gonna learn about that community, so. But that's down the line. Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, one more thing that just popped to my mind. We talked about wayfinding signs on these trails also. And I guess, how do we incorporate the wayfinding signs along with the cultural aspect? Because I think they're on the same trail. And so if you're using this trail and you want to know, you know, going this way is going to half mile to get you somewhere, I think there needs to be a coordination between that kind of signage and what we're doing on this other side.
Mayor and council, so separate contract. We are working with Confluence, who already came up with some concepts, so we would have a citywide wayfinding system. I think here tonight, Three Rivers on their specific trails will have a wayfinding system, and they'll all work together. That's where they're here tonight to present and let you talk about that. But I think, we heard through the comp plan, the park planning process, and from you all that, you know, wayfinding is important so people know where they're going. So the first piece we're actually gonna roll that out on will be on the Veerling Greenway Trail. So that's gonna have a pretty specific signage because it's our longest trail in the city. We already own, it's pretty spectacular, and that same thing. So one of the things that we found, people don't know whether it's quarter mile, half mile, so when they're walking, you know, am I gonna be there in an hour or am I gonna be there in 15 minutes? We can do that by showing people distances so they can at least gauge how far they are.
Mayor, what I'm trying to get at is, let's say we adopt some kind of a signage look, if you will, for the Veerling Trail. And we adopt that for all of our trails. And then we come up later with what we're gonna do with informational kiosk type things on this corridor. And then we put the wayfinding signs on this same corridor. Are they gonna contrast, or are they gonna be different than the other wayfinding signs within town? These are the things that I'm thinking about.
Mayor and council, I think our goal is to have, there's two different kinds of signatures. There's informational, which is history, architecture, whatever, and here's where you are. I think the here's where you are signs, our goal will be to make them sort of universal on city trails. So any part that's under our control or we have the ability to control, we're gonna try and come up with something that's pretty straightforward and easy to follow.
Counselor Whiting.
And I think from what I'm hearing you say about this corridor, those signs would be coordinated too through this consortium.
Yes.
You know, I do want to have a lot of people seated at the table in this, so I appreciate that we've discussed that and letting people have access to it. And I know the grant is one thing, but this is exciting, and it's not what people are thinking it's going to be out there in the internet and in Shakopee here. So I really hope people take a look at it and understand that this is all not going to happen at once, and it's just the start of here trying to get a grant. So
And Mayor and Council, I'll give you credit because we were told at the meeting that Mr. Reynolds and I were at that 3 or 4 years ago that this discussion would not have occurred had it not come up in the comp plan and in the parks plan. And I think everybody kind of went, oh, we really should be working together on this. And so when we had the meeting, they all kind of said, thanks to the city for bringing this up. We should have been at the table sooner. And I think particularly Three Rivers, who has a pretty big asset that's not heavily used. I mean, they have said up front, from a trail standpoint, they would love to get 10 or 20,000 people here just walking their dog through there. And how can we make that happen?
if I can continue, and I think, and I want to credit the Heritage Society because they've been working to try and get these partners together, and I think they may have sparked some interest. So appreciate that, and I think I'm looking forward to getting this grant started. And I will. Oh, is there someone else want to add?
No, I just wanted to add, there is a lot of misinformation that's going out in regards to what we're looking at here. I'm actually a member of the Shakopee American Legion Post Number 2, and I got a postcard in the mail today. It says on January 27th, a special meeting will be held at the Shakopee American Legion Post beginning at 7 p.m. This meeting is open to all veterans and citizens of the area in and surrounding Shakopee. It concerns the attempt to close and move Memorial Park. Well, that's just false information, and it's a shame that that this information is being put out. There's never been any discussion about closing Memorial Park. I have no idea where that came from. It's just a shame that people are telling our veterans something that is patently untrue, and I'll leave it at that.
Did you hear about this, Councilman Lehman?
I did. I got the card too, but
put out the
I'm not a
card?
veteran.
No, right.
I don't know who put the card out.
Okay. Counselor Whiting.
I plan on attending that meeting to try and alleviate some of the stress, and I hope I can get some information from staff to help me do that. But it is not moving, and of course, we got to respect the cultural, aspects of Memorial Park and the things that are there. So, anyone add, or I can add the resolution here? I'd like to offer Resolution R 2020-007, supporting the creation of the Scott County Cultural Consortium and Scott County Historical Society application to the Heritage Partnership Program.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all, great discussion. Thank you, Michael. Moving on then to 7A1, Monthly Financial Report, December 19. Nate, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Nate Reinhardt, Finance Director for the city. Just give me a second here and I'll pull up a PowerPoint.
It's a few more slides than usual.
I had it on a report or a PDF last time and it didn't really come through very well, so I thought this would be a little bit easier to look. But pulled up on the screen before you is the December monthly financial report. These are the preliminary results for December 31st, 2019. Over the next several weeks, we'll be paying bills, collecting receipts, and preparing journal entries related to 2019. So these results will be adjusted from what's shown in front of you today. Overall, for the general fund, we ended the year with positive results in the fund in comparison with the budget and ahead of last year as well, 2018. On the revenue side, overall general fund revenues are slightly over the revised budget by about $65,000. Second half property taxes were receipted in December. There will be one additional short settlement in January for property taxes collected from October 15th to December 31st. Special assessment revenues have exceeded the anticipated budget. Most of the special assessments are for delinquent garbage collections. And then for licenses and permits, year-to-date revenues were $4.6 million in total for 2019, which is $2 million more than in 2018. Miscellaneous continues to track at a higher pace compared to 2018. Which is mainly attributed to investment income. On the expenditure side, overall general fund total budgeted expenditures are at 95% which is under budget by 1.4 million. Again, these are preliminary results, so that will likely change as bills come in. The mayor and council department will exceed the original budget as a result of the Reverend Pond downtown sculpture. That was not accounted for in the budget. Street maintenance will exceed the budget as a result of the purchase of street materials. And then the unallocated expenditures were also under budget, which is mainly a result of unspent contingency. There's not any major or concerning variances within the general fund, and I'm happy to be able to report the positive results. Overall, for the general fund, revenues were ahead of expenditures by about 3.8 million, so we will be adding fund balance in 2019. On the next slide is our operating results of the recreational facilities. Sand Venture ended the year with a net budget, revenues less expenditures of 5.7% below 2018, and about $10,744 below the budget for the year. The ice arena revenues did not include $129,000 of additional revenues. That was actually collected in the past week here after we had prepared this report. With that additional revenue, the ice arena will exceed the 2018 actual and 2019 budgeted revenues. For the community center, we continue tracking ahead of projections on the revenue side by about 10%. The budgeted revenues were $116,000 more than budgeted for 2019. The expenditure side, we were ahead of projections there, mainly due to increased demand and increased expenses related to revenue producing activities.
Questions on this? All right, continue.
Included with the council materials is the fourth quarter investment report, which we provide to you on a quarterly basis. The investment report that was in the council packet contains a lot of information, which includes summarized investment performance information, comparison to our benchmarks, and a listing of all our individual holdings. On this slide and the next slide, I wanted to provide a comparison of the current year results compared to the past couple of years. The total investment gain is comprised of two different factors. The first one shown here is the investment income or interest earnings on our investments. For 2019, we had interest earnings of 1.25 million in comparison to last year's earnings of 948,000. So an increase of a little over 300,000. Wait. Yeah, so I think I said that right. For 2019, we had interest earnings of 1.25 million compared to 948,000, so a little over 300,000. On the next slide, this is the unrealized gain or loss. This is a result of the change in market value from year to year. At the end of the year, we made an adjustment to the market value for 2019 of 1.1 million, so a gain of 1.1 million. In comparison to last year, we had an unrealized loss of 25,000. The city does intend to hold all investments until they mature. However, it's important to keep in mind that changes in interest rates will impact unrealized gains or losses of the portfolio. Rising interest rates since 2016 resulted in unrealized or paper losses over the past couple of years, while declining rates in 2019 have led to the unrealized gains. And then on this last slide, I just wanted to show a historical 2-year treasury rates. 2 years is close to what our average maturity is in our portfolio, which explains a lot of the results from the previous 2 slides. With the rise of interest rates coming into this year leading to higher investment earnings for 2019, and then decreasing rates during the year in 2019 leading to that large unrealized gain. The other thing I wanted to kind of note here, if you look at the drop from 2.52 to 1.58 from 18 to 19, that'll impact our rates as we move forward. So likely investment income in 2020 might not be as high as it was in 2019. So with that, that concludes the Q4 financial report.
Councilor Lehman.
Page 6.
Wow.
Can we go into this
Let's see
slide?
what Nate or he. Page 6.
Portfolio composition, portfolio activity. Read this page right here.
Sure, I'll get to it.
The market appreciation is 57,627. So it shows an income received of $290,944. And then right below it, it shows a negative number, $57,627, market appreciation.
Is there a question with that? or-
Yeah, my question is I see the realized gain loss of 25,000, and I'm trying to add these numbers up to make them equal to 251,804, and it's not working. What am I doing wrong?
Okay, so you're looking at, basically trying to compare to this slide, right? Is that correct?
No, I'm looking at this page right here, page 6. The 6 on the top right.
Can you repeat your question then? Just to confirm I'm answering the right question here.
It shows income received net of expenses, $290,944. Below it, it says market appreciation, negative $57,627. And then 2 lines down, it says realized gain loss, $25,415, for a total change of $251,804.
Yeah, I believe that's on the quarterly basis.
Is the market appreciation subtracted?
Or it's negative.
Right, but a lot of times the negatives mean the opposite in accounting.
Yeah, I think it's looking at it on a quarterly basis, so it might be different than what you're seeing on the full year.
Nate can follow up and get a better explanation of that. Portfolio activity on page 6.
Okay.
Yeah, let's get back to that.
Yep.
That's fine. Okay, do you have more?
Nope, I do not.
Other questions on this? Remind everybody that we have an investment policy of SLY, safety, liquidity, and yield. And I think actually we do very well. The unrealized mark-to-market book that showed value in that shows that the investments that we buy are in demand because they're bidding those prices up, pushing the yield down. We're not a seller of those products, but we price them every month at what their value is. And so I think that's a good indication of the health of the product within our portfolio. More questions on this? No action required, just review. Nate, thank you, and follow up in regard to that page 6. All right. If there's no other questions on this, we would move ahead then to 7A2, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. 7A2 is basically dealing with the review of the city attorney's legal opinion on Shakopee Public Utilities' unilateral action to modify the city contribution agreement. And if you'll bear with me a little bit, I wanted to give some history on this particular item because I think it's important and also determine how we got here today. On Tuesday, December 3rd, Councilor Lehman informed the City Council that SPUC was in the process of making that change to a long-standing agreement between the city and SPUC, which has been in place since 1977 on this particular amount. Following that announcement, an inquiry was made to SPUC regarding the issue, since frankly it kind of caught staff and members of council off guard. There was never any discussion about that, even though the city had brought up that point earlier, which I'll refer to in a few minutes. As part of that, the SPUC's Director of Finance and Administration responded to that inquiry, and I quote, "The Shakopee Public Utilities Commission is the governing body with authority for setting rates for the electric and water utilities and determining the municipal contribution amounts, neither of which require city council approval, excuse me." Upon receiving that response, I inquired to Ms. Schmidt, who is the Director of Finance Administration for SPUC. Can you please help me understand where SPUC gets the authority to determine municipal contribution amounts without city agreement? This appears to be very different than our history and contrary to city ordinances. As part of that, I also copied multiple people in the Spuck organization, including Mr. John Crooks, the Spuck Utilities Manager, and Mr. Terry Jost, the Spuck President. I received no inquiry, but I really wasn't surprised by that because frankly, I think the last 7 or 8 times I've made a request of Spuck, I've received no information back. So on Monday, December 16th, Spuck moved ahead and unilaterally changed the formula used to determine the contributions made to the city without any notice or discussion other than the heads up that Councilor Lehman gave us as a body, and even that had no any details. It just simply said that it was going to happen. Based upon the city council's concern at our last meeting, the city attorney has reviewed this, and the pertinent parts of his opinion, which he's here obviously, and his opinion is attached to this particular memo. 2 big points. Historically, since 1950, Spuck's payments to the city in lieu of taxes has been determined either by agreement between the parties or by a separate action of the city or the state legislature. And 2, in 2001, the city and Spuck agreed to the current formula, and the city has not agreed to modify that agreement. That 2001 agreement actually refers back to the 1977 agreement, which was the original. As I noted before, it should be noted that, frankly, the city has always been willing to address. I can't comment in regards as to why the water contribution level is what it is. It was what was determined to be in 1977 and ratified in 2001 by both entities. I can tell you, I look at it and I certainly say, yeah, maybe we should take a look at that and see if that shouldn't be lowered. And essentially put the issue on the table in the memo that we sent out in June 7th, and basically had asked Spuck that, and I'll quote from that memo, Spuck, as do most public utilities, provides a yearly transfer to the city's general fund from both their water and electrical operations. Spuck has the second largest sales in waters and pays the second largest water contribution to the city. But it has the largest sales in electric and is behind 5 of the top 6 in city contributions, several by millions. Based upon this information, would Spuck be amenable to reviewing their contribution in regards to its electrical revenues? Well, as you well know, the June 7th memo was tabled by Spuck with no comment until this organization was forced to ask publicly for them to answer the questions that were in that memo. When this particular item was, the answer to this particular item was brought forward, there was no comment one way or the other. It just simply referred to the historical nature of those particular contributions. This issue certainly needs to be addressed. I think that it's ripe for both bodies to sit down and lower the water contribution rate and look at adjusting the electrical contribution rate. But it is not, we don't have the power any more than Spuck has the power to unilaterally do that. Once again, we're in a situation where Spuck has done what they want to do without doing anything in regards to even notifying the city what was to occur. We've seen that time and time again in the last couple of years, especially when we talk about the water parts of the comprehensive plan, which the city didn't even have the opportunity to review until it was submitted. So I'm making a plea to Spuck in general, come to the table, talk with us, let us work this stuff out. The idea that we have to continually be at loggerheads over these issues is simply not true. We can work through these issues. And I think anyone, if there had been an email, a phone call that said, hey, we'd like to look at this, absolutely, let's sit down and talk about this particular issue. Again, we tried to put that on the table in June of last year. All that being said, the city attorney here is here. Obviously, you have his opinion, and we're just trying to get some direction at this point from a staff level as to what the city would like to have us do.
All right. I guess the last time this was changed was in 2001 after a financial study conducted by the city at that time. And then there was an agreement by both parties to come to that. I remember the late Bob Sweeney was involved in that. But there was, city staff or city attorney, was there no resolution in 2001 verifying that or identifying, putting that into the public record?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, no, there was no separate resolution by the city council at that time. The resolution by Spuck does recite that there was discussions and the amount was, I don't know, I can get it, I can get the
No,
exact
that's fine.
wordings, but.
Right.
And so, no, there was not a separate resolution adopted by the
Right.
council that I could find.
In my history, at least, that to me was an agreed upon thing. I know it was worked on for several months, and then we agreed, whether resolution or not, and then now there was a change without agreement. And I think that's where we're at today, that there isn't an agreement. Counselor Lehman, do you remember any other information from 2001?
No.
All right.
But I would like to make a couple comments. When I first learned that they were contemplating some fee changes and stuff, I did tell them at that meeting, and it's on the record, their video, that my concern for the city's sake is any changes they make, in my opinion, seem to be, 11th hour in our budget process, that my concern be that they don't make any changes that would negatively impact the city's position, especially so late in our budget cycle. And they recognize that. So the changes that they did make didn't impact the city financially. Doesn't negate, agreement and discussion and that issue itself, but that was my concern that I did raise on behalf of the city at that meeting. I did come forward to the council and told them they were contemplating some changes. I did follow up and pointed out that they did make some changes. It's probably a good time to have a sit-down joint meeting with them. I know that their intention, at least, it's hard for me to tell what they're actually thinking individually, but from what I hear sitting at their meeting is their intention is not to shortchange the city. Their intention with the change from the 24%, and I'm rounding, it's 23.77, but 24% of water and whatever the electrical was, it was smaller than 4.4. The 4.4 and 4.4 comes out to the same dollar amount, and their rationale for that was that 25% of their water sales going to the city of Shakopee, general fund for whatever purposes, unspecified, is bringing down the operational reserve of their water operations, which is separate from the development fees that some could argue are higher, lower, whatever, but they're separate funds.
Talking about the pilot.
This is just the operational side of the water. So, if they continue at this pace, 2 or 3 years out, the water operational fund is gonna be in the negative. And so they're looking at it from their standpoint of how do we not put ourselves in that position, and still keep the city whole, so.
Okay.
So it's probably due for a joint meeting.
Okay.
I would certainly support that. We all did receive an email from the utility today, saying they would follow up at a future date when they had a little more time. I guess they had multiple meetings going on. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I haven't seen it either. I did have their meeting tonight. Wasn't any discussion specifically, other than, yeah, they're gonna formulate a response when they have time, because they had a meeting today, their regular meeting, and they had some other meeting that I'm not going to that other meeting. And then I asked at the meeting, make sure that I'm clear on what I'm now saying to council, because that's my read, and correct me if I'm wrong. And yes, I have that read correct.
Okay. Counselor, Mr. Reynolds.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of council, just to be clear, our initial analysis has this affecting us to the bad by 22,000 average a year. 22,000 is not that much in the overall scheme of things, but it is negatively impacting.
Counselor Whiting?
My concern is a precedent setting, setting the rates. I would like to request that staffs or us as bodies try to negotiate this out. Barring that, I think we'd have to seek judicial remedy.
Counselor Brennan? Counselor Contreras? So we had a joint meeting almost a year ago or over a year ago. And we said we would meet again, but I know these, agendas get busy. I think that if we have a joint meeting, that would be fine, but we should have a pretty defined agenda that has somewhat of a narrow focus. We don't need the history lesson and things like that, but I know we were talking about rates, and we could include that. This is water connection rates, all that aspect, which was a bulk of the discussion last time. I think we've had a lot of information on that, but I think what's come of now is this, what appears to be a unilateral, two-party agreement on the pilot. And I think actually for right now, that should be the main focus right now, if we had a joint meeting. Councilor Lehman.
Mayor, I'm gonna add one thing that I think is probably a higher priority. Not that that's not a good topic of discussion, but it seems to me the highest priority for the discussion would be for both entities sitting down discussing what is proper notification. Let's figure that out and have everybody agree on it, because some legal standards say proper notification is, you put your agenda up, City Hall puts out their agenda online, that's proper notification by legal standard. Is that the proper and legal definition of the utility putting out proper notification?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the two bodies need to get together and agree to what is the going forward proper notification going to be acceptable to both.
That's for user rates. And that's fine.
Well, a lot of this
Not on the
discussion is
pilot.
that the city wasn't notified. So,
Okay. Counselor Whiting?
And I'd like to agree with that. I think that the issue, or agree with the mayor, I'm sorry. The issue is not with the rates, it's with the notification of the rates. It's the issue of the pilot, which has always been negotiated. And that's the concern.
Mr. Reynolds?
With all due respect to the issue of notice, simply having Councilor Lehman come here and say that SPUC is going to make a change is not notice of anything, other than that they're going to make a change.
right.
Whether, there needs to be some specificity as to what the change is. And that's an important piece of what notice is all about. That's why when we do our agendas, you should be able to read the agenda and know what we're doing. So we're giving notice to the public. But if all you're saying is that we're going to change something, that's not notice to anybody.
So if we were to have a joint meeting, we could have two things that I am hearing. One would be on the notice of user rates and what that looks like. And if that needs to be changed from the way it's happened in the last couple of years or recently on user rates. And then I think the second item is look at the process and come to an agreement on the process for changing the pilot changing the pilot under an agreement that I think our legal counsel has mentioned, that's been done in the past. That appears not to be done this time. With that,
I agree with that.
huh?
I agree too.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
yes.
Let me just say one thing. Nothing in my memo or anything is intended to say that you can't agree to what they
Right,
did. It's
absolutely.
it's just that I think.
have to agree.
Yeah, and an agreement doesn't, I mean, it's better that it be in writing. Is it better that you both got resolutions? Probably. But my quick review of the history of the 2001 action was there was a rate discussion, there was franchise fees discussion, the rate was changed, the contribution rate was changed as elected. As a result of that, it was clearly discussion, give and take, back and forth between the city council. I agree that Councilmember Sweeney was the main purveyor of that information, and the council pretty much deferred to him on that, I think. But there was discussion, and it certainly at least implicit agreement that electric franchise contribution was going to change, even though there's no written resolution or a formal written agreement to that effect.
Mr. Reynolds?
And it was actually changed based upon a city study.
Okay, that's right.
I would think that if we came to an agreement that on a pilot, and if they want to look at lessening the water aspect of it, I know that discussion and analysis by our own Baker Tilly, maybe a percentage of revenues, but I think that moving forward, the outcome hopefully would be by resolution that we would make any changes to the pilot program, not user rates to the pilot, but we'll see where we can get for that. So we'll call for a special meeting, a joint meeting of the Shakopee Public Utilities, the City of Shakopee City Council, over the next couple months. Obviously, there's some calendars involved. I'd like to just see two things on the agenda personally, but hopefully there would be consensus, and they would be the notification of changing user rates and what seems to be a lot of statutorial and resolution agreement on coming to an agreement on a pilot.
Mayor, wasn't the concern the notification of changes to the pilot? I mean, I'm not sure where user rates came in here.
I might be able to help on that, Mr. Mayor. No, there were two issues. One was, did they give the city code says they need to inform the council after, well, they need to inform the council, in my opinion, before they adopt the rates. Just inform, no consent, you don't get the consent, but they're supposed to inform you. I concluded in this case that they actually did that, somewhat through inadvertence. I shouldn't say inadvertence, but it only happened because of a request from the city, but it did happen. So that's why I recommended that it would be better if you could come to some agreement with Spuck as to how that's going to happen in the future.
Should it come from the liaison after a meeting? Should it, obviously, the concept of changing their user rates was contemplated by staff a week or two or before that. Eventually, I think that should come in direct written notice to the city of Shakopee and the city administrator. And yes, this time, yes, it came from you.
Well, the problem from my perspective is, okay, so you can look at their agenda and you can see they're contemplating making some changes, but they haven't actually made the changes. So yeah, they're contemplating some changes, which is what I told you. And when you go to the next meeting, you know, short of notifying you saying, okay, I'm going to a meeting now, that they're going to follow up on contemplating making some changes. Don't know if they're going to adopt it tonight or not until after the meeting, and when they actually do adopt it, and then they do adopt it, and then I come back and say, okay, now they adopted this, you know?
Mr. Reynolds.
As with any other notice, we could receive simply a written notification from the Spuck manager that says that they are contemplating moving a rate from here to here, and that's notice. Now, if they happen to not do it, well, that's fine. You still have notice that it was contemplated. It's not rocket science.
Okay. I've kind of laid out my idea, but I want to make sure that we're built enough consensus on this, Counselor Whiting?
Notice of rates in the pilot, and I want to add that the pilot, for those watching at home, we keep using that term, that's the payment in lieu of taxes that the utility pays the city. I agree with that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd like to see us move away from the pilot because they're a tax exempt entity, and like any other utility, we now call it a franchise tax.
Could call it a franchise, could be a percentage of revenues. A label's a label. There's
Right.
always, you know, I was trying to think about I think a pilot in a municipal aspect is the proper term. A franchise fee is for businesses that are investor-owned in most typical sense. That's why they're slightly different terms.
Okay.
Mr. Reynolds?
And I believe that the city council does not have the ability to request a franchise fee from the utility. I believe that's correct.
That's correct.
It has to be a term to,
A privately held,
so.
you can only do that with the privately held companies, is that what you said?
I think you could have a utility that would be privately owned that would be a franchise payer. But I think that SPUCA is a municipal utility, an arm's length transactional from the legislature and the power of the city council that developed it. So, that's kind of how I look at it. I think the word pilot and with franchise fee is for for-profit businesses. All right, we're on consensus. We have enough direction for staff? Okay. Then we will move ahead. Let's move ahead to 7A3, City Council meeting rule of conduct. Mr. Reynolds, and this is coming back to us after presentation.
Yes, sir. Just real quickly, just kind of wanted to note, these are kind of ground rules that we had preliminarily discussed at our last meeting, and, you know, essentially recognizing that there are times where, especially lately in the Twin Cities area, there have been communities where meetings have been kind of out of control to a degree, and this just provides notice as to what the city council expects to happen at its particular meetings. And this also gives the mayor the ability to, if a situation does get out of control, to make that determination and to adjourn the meeting, either recess or adjourn. And then, obviously, after that occurs, staff would have to figure out when we would meet again, and then to conduct the business that we did not conduct when the adjournment happened.
Okay. Obviously, the second to last bullet point gives the mayor or chair, depending, a little bit of leeway here to issue warnings, exclude a person if they continue to do it, and call for a recess or adjournment for safety concerns. Could exclude someone, but I think this is what we talked about. And I like the verbiage on this. Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, my only concern is C at the very bottom, to recess or adjourn the meeting for safety reasons. I believe anybody here at this body, if they feel unsafe by people in the audience, should be able to make a motion to adjourn. And if there's a second, so be it, and you move on and you adjourn.
All right.
So, I don't think that's prohibited from happening, is it, Jim?
No,
Okay.
no.
Great.
And I think it was added just because the mayor typically doesn't make a motion for something like that, but I agree with you, yeah.
And certainly if we're here and much like those videos, if, if I'm talking to that and someone feels at unease, they certainly can make a motion and get a second, and we can take action on that. I think we saw those public videos where one mayor just called for a recess, because of the situation. But more discussion on this?
Think somebody should read it for the public?
A situation, when a situation gets to the point to where this body can't function effectively, it's
Right. Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, and we will have placards made of the rules that are passed by council to make sure that the public understands what the expectations are.
Have them up at the podium, have them out on the table. That'll be fine. We need all to be civil and respectful of all. So, all right, Counselor Contreras.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the following rules of conduct for all Shakopee government meetings to provide for valuable public input and to conduct safe and effective public meetings. Would you like me to read them?
Yeah, I have a motion. Yep, go ahead.
Unless permitted, everyone should remain seated, not block any doorways, and not enter the space forward of the speaker's podium. No movement of chairs is allowed. Speakers should not make personal attacks, air personal grievances, make political endorsements, or make political campaign statements. Audience members should not engage in disorderly conduct, including using loud, threatening, or abusive language, whistling, clapping, stomping of feet, repeatedly waving of arms, or other disruptive acts or gestures. All demonstrations which disrupt or impede the orderly conduct of the meetings are prohibited. Photographs, audio tapes, and videotapes may be taken from any available public seat or from the meeting room rear. This activity should not be conducted in any manner that disturbs or disrupts the audience, speakers, or council members, or otherwise disrupt the council meeting. Animals are prohibited in the council chambers except training service animals as defined under state and federal law. The mayor or the chair shall be responsible for maintaining the order of all meetings and has the following powers: to issue a verbal warning to a person violating these rules, to exclude a person from the remainder of a meeting if after a warning a person continues to violate the rules, and to recess or adjourn the meeting for safety reasons. Repeated violations of the rules or conduct may result in the exclusion of a person from future city council meetings for a time period specified by the city council.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Whiting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. It's been read into the public record. Further discussion? Counselor
Just one
Whiting?
point, we came to these rules because of incidents, and I think it was mentioned that happened at other city council meetings in the region, so that's why we're doing this.
I think the key point for me is that one of these bullet points, all demonstrations which disrupt or impede the orderly conduct of meetings are prohibited. And we do conduct city business here. Motion and second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Let's move ahead. 7B1 for Scott County Wayfind, regional trails of wayfinding. Jay?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This evening, we're going to be taking a look at a concept plan for wayfinding and kiosks along the regional trail. Staff has been working with Scott County staff for quite a while on this. It was identified that wayfinding and trail signage is a concern in the comp plan and in the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Master Plan. And so this is a first step that discussion has been happening amongst Public Works Engineering, Planning, and the Parks and Recreation Department for some time. So I'd like to invite Mr. Nathan Moe from Scott County to come and share his presentation on wayfinding.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thanks for having us. So the slide you're looking at here is the first iteration of the Scott West Regional Trail. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll keep referring to it as the Scott West Regional Trail, but we are...
Take it full screen for you quick.
Oh, that'd be great. Just so you're aware, when you see signage in the future, it will have a new name, something that makes a little bit more sense, given that this trail connects with the north and the easterly portions of the county. The Scott West Regional Trail may not make the most sense. So just for practical purposes, I'll be referring to it as the Scott West Regional Trail. This, as it stands today, this is essentially what is in the ground. There is a trail on these solid line segments and then planned trails in these dash line segments. In the past couple of years, there have been some segments on County Road 78 and 79 that have basically created 2 long segments of the trail. And at that time, we started thinking about how can we better communicate that there's this regional trail in Scott County connecting people with all these regional resources. So that's why we started looking at wayfinding for the purposes of the Scott West Regional Trail and making sure people understood what it connects. And just for informational purposes, like I said, there is this longer segment here that is planned to be completed. Nothing's on the county hasn't identified specific dollars for that, but there are some preliminary plans that it might be constructed within 10 years. Pretty major job, so something we're continuing to look at. So we've identified a kiosk fabrication style and some preliminary content to put on those kiosks, and we want to share those with you today. What we're proposing in the first phase of this implementation is using level A kiosk, and slides a little later in the presentation will show exactly where we're looking at putting those, but they are they're taking some inspiration from what is already implemented in Three Rivers Park District on their regional trails. And one of our biggest goals out of creating something for Scott County was to create something that's a little still iconic, so the user recognizes that they are on a regional trail, and then as they continue to see other wayfinding elements on the trail, that they can connect those dots. But also we recognize that what's in Hennepin County and parts of other counties that Three Rivers has regional trails is that it's very expensive and it's also incredibly large. So our level A kiosk at a trailhead looks a bit like this, whereas in Three Rivers it would be something about this size, another kiosk next to it to present all of the different information that would be needed. Hi. So each of these squares, there's 2 squares here, are 4 feet by 4 feet. So approximately 10 feet with the roof and all that. The other ones, I know the concrete pad in Three Rivers is a 30-foot long concrete pad when you have all of the different elements that they incorporate here. So we did shrink it down quite a bit, and it'll also allow us to share all the information we want to share with our trail users. We are trying to be really flexible with this design, so this type of kiosk here and all the other versions that are similar to this in size and scope can be 2-sided if it makes sense on the site. We intend to use them at trailheads and major trail intersections. We want to be able to share a trail map that highlights local connections. This is an instance here where we recognize that the trail user may be on a regional trail, but they may not care to stay on the regional trail. They just want to have a good experience on trails, and that may mean taking local trails. So we want to be able to have this information hand off to any local signage that's there. We want to be complementary to what you're putting in the ground on your trails. And as the earlier presentation talked about, this trail does intersect with the future cultural corridor. So we want to make sure that we're respectful of those signs as well. Just a little bit of other information on these signs. The system, we want to help people understand, especially because this trail will connect with the larger system when the 101 trail in Chanhassen is completed next year. And then we have some flexible space. We want to show what are the highlights along the trails, and then just simple things like trail rolls. So as I mentioned, phase 1 is to install 2 kiosks like this in downtown Shakopee. Our goal for this, we could have started in Prior Lake. We could have started just outside of, or within Cleary Lake, as the trail does go through those, but we recognize that in Scott County, a lot of the investment in regional recreation dollars, at least through Met Council, is in Prior Lake, it's in Savage, it's in the outskirts of the suburban ring, and we want to invest in Shakopee. So that is our intention, and also recognizing that if you're familiar with where this trail goes, and the next slide will show it better, this is a really confusing part of the regional trail because it goes under County Road 69, and you have to use the switchbacks on both sides of that, and then get back up onto the Holmes Street Bridge. So one of those locations is the State Trail connecting with Huber Park and the state and that parking lot associated with Huber Park. And then we also recognize that there's a lot of the community that's going to be in the downtown area, especially on nights like the Rhythm on the Rails. So recognizing that busy pedestrian corridor, putting one at the top of the southern switchbacks on First Avenue and Holmes Street would make a lot of sense. And then, of course, we recognize the really engaging, interesting plans you have for this area, and we want to be flexible. So how we're proposing to install these in a way that's minimally invasive in the land. We're not proposing large swaths of concrete. Potentially, we are just putting a couple of concrete supports and then placing these onto those. So if things change in the future and this area drastically, the locations maybe no longer make sense based on those changes, we can pull these out of the ground, maybe make some minor content changes and put them in a new location that makes more sense. So this is a representation of where we're looking at placing them. I'll start at the Levy Drive option. This has been a really challenging area to think about where it makes the most sense to put some sort of kiosk here. I've been down in this site with city staff. I've been with the trails manager at Three Rivers Park District several times, and we've kind of juggled all the different pros and cons of certain areas. And most recently, working with staff, we decided to take a really hard look at what it would mean to place it at the bottom of that switchback, right where the two trails intersect. And initially, we've discussed that being a little too tight, but I think if we were to put down a little extra bituminous blacktop, we could create enough space that site would work. So I think that would be really helpful. It is at the exact nexus of those two trails, and would allow us to help connect people with the State Trail, connect people with Huber Park, and then hopefully clearly get people continuing on the regional trail if that's their desire. So as a trail, I'll also mention that the trails manager at Three Rivers Park District has said this segment is the most confusing segment of regional trail throughout the Three Rivers Park District, 150 miles of trail that they have. So that's partly why we're proposing 2 of these kiosks in this area. So we have 2 options for this area on First Avenue. The easiest option is to just go offset of what's existing there. There's concrete and then there's pavers, and there's just enough space between a monument and a light pole there, and it doesn't appear that utilities are an issue that we could put it into that spot. That's the Blue Star. Talking with city staff, we also recognize that we have an opportunity here where we could go 2-sided, and we could put Three Rivers Scott County information on one side, and we could incorporate some local information on the other side. And in that case, it may make sense to go to a 2-sided kiosk and put it within the pavers just off of First Avenue there. So we're flexible with both options. It depends on if the city has interest in putting something in terms of content, filling up one side of that, but we're happy to explore both options and move forward with city preference. And then I'll just hit on a couple other improvements that we've talked about with staff just as a concept. On Holmes Street particularly, it's an on-street segment of this regional trail that's a bit rare. So adding some additional components, things that have been in the master plan, things that have been approved previously. And I'll just highlight those really briefly. Currently, there's bike boulevard signs, green signs that are on Home Street. That was an initiative put together by the city. We're proposing that we replace those with something that's branded as this regional trail and provides like a continuous color compatibility between the kiosks and these blue signs. We're not proposing additional signs. We're proposing that we would replace these, and so there wouldn't be additional signs for the community.
We have some questions, Counselor Lehman.
The sign up on 10th in one of your slides shows the forward and turn, right there,
There.
okay? So you're gonna replace that sign, then how does the person know that they're supposed to turn there and that's where the trail goes? If you replace that sign with the share the road sign?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me explain that. So the share the road sign would be an additional sign. The one we're looking at here is a replacement of a sign. And we're just proposing that this share the road sign would bolster the idea that there are going to be trail bikers and potentially pedestrians on Home Street. So that was our intention with that sign, is that it would be as you enter Home Street on the north and the south end.
So you'd still have the arrow sign saying
Correct.
you're on the right path?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I apologize. Counselor Brennan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to finish or you just want. me to-
It doesn't matter to me, whatever you prefer.
Okay.
I have a couple
I have
more.
a
but-
question about the kiosk placement where the stars are located, the green and blue stars. I wouldn't want it to block the actual visual of where the tunnel is. I looked at the one that was presented to the park board, and you couldn't see the tunnel. So that's what I would be concerned about, because
That makes sense.
yeah. And then Home Street, we were talking about, and a lot of people park on homes. So how does that work? If if people are parking on the side of the road and this is a designated bike route? Because right now, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so
I don't know if it will change at all.
Right, and we're not proposing that this would impact the parking availability. It's just trying to make it really visually obvious to drivers that there might be people biking on this road. And the other thing that we're proposing, and is also in the master plan, is the use of shared lane markings. And that's just that one other piece that would help people as they're driving to identify that there's bikers and other folks that are using the road. It's something that's for everybody.
Counselor Whiting?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love the idea of marking for pedestrians or bikers and car traffic. If you could go back to the slide with the placement of the kiosk. I have no issue with the Levy Drive option. I think that's a good spot for it. I would be concerned with the other spots and the size of that sign. Is there any way that it could be made into a cube, like a four-sided sign? If you were talking 10-foot before, that would be
Right.
2.5.
So the other type of kiosk that we have, basically our intention with the content is that it's modular. So each of the pieces is basically 2 foot by 4 foot. So we've got a kiosk designed for that full extent that would include all 4 of those. That's 8 by 4 foot, and then we've got one that's 6 by 4 foot, and then we've got one that's 4 by 4 foot. And then, of course, all of those can be double-sided as well. So if shrinking it by 2 feet or shrinking it by 4 feet is needed for that site, it's something we can do.
If I could, I wouldn't have a problem if it were down on the ramp area, but that's kind of diminishing the purpose of what you're looking at here. So it's just the size of that. So if we could scale it down, I would consider that, but not at 10 feet.
Yeah.
That's just too big.
My questions are, we just had a discussion about the cultural consortium and the cultural corridor, and I think we need more trail directions to be able to find it. We've talked about wayfinding for a long time here. I like that you want to highlight this route because I think a lot of people don't know about it and anything we can do there, but I'm thinking, here's a Scott County regional trail, and then eventually you're gonna connect to the cultural corridor, and we want consistent look and view of those signage, right? So I know that I'm no longer on a county regional trail, I'm on a cultural and how that transitions, so, and I know that maybe in other areas for this trail, there, you know, I think that sometimes there's two types of trails running down the same corridor, right?
Right.
And one might go this way after a mile or a block or two, or, and the other path, and they're two different things, right? So I think you should obviously take that in consideration too, but I don't have a problem down here, just if we can highlight and get more use out of this difficult area here. And even help the old bridge a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, just to kind of touch on something that you broached there. So to highlight the 3 maps proposed on the content here, the system map is pretty, small scale. It's showing the full 2 counties. And then this map is showing the full extent of the regional trail, so all the way from the river, actually all the way from the connection with the Hennepin/Carver County Regional Trail, and then to Cleary Lake. We'd probably revise it once it connects with Murphy-Hannerhan. But then this last map is an aerial of the direct vicinity. And I don't know how visible that is on your papers, but there is the real opportunity to really highlight some of the local facilities that we can connect people with. And so,
Would we ever think that the city can control that slot, and then
well, we've definitely
if we're all in partnership?
Yeah, we've shared this draft map with city staff to provide comment and make sure that we're representing things accurately. And as we make updates to that map, we would obviously continue to have those.
That'd be great, and then get the city logo at the bottom, that would be awesome. More questions, Councilor Brennan?
How is the durability of the material, and who would be maintaining the signs and making sure if there's graffiti or any damage, or it's just wearing out and getting sunbeaten? Or
Great question. That is one of the reasons for the size of the kiosks. They're intended to be really stable to support any sort of wind shear that comes through, and to be pretty vandal resistant. Our maintenance staff through Three Rivers that maintains all of the kiosks on the 150 miles within Hennepin County has had, I don't believe there's been any instances of the actual structure being damaged. There have been some instances of graffiti on the signs themselves, and they are coated with a material that allows for easy removal, and they're not terribly expensive if there was some sort of vandalism on the kiosk content itself. It'd be something that'd be pretty easy to replace. And Three Rivers, Scott County will be funding the maintenance of these kiosks.
Councilor Lehman?
The slide with the location downtown, there you go. The 2-sided option is what size?
It is the same size, although flexible based on what I had mentioned to Councilmember Whiting. So 8 foot by 4 foot in terms of the content, about 10 feet wide is what we had proposed.
So
it could be smaller.
where would we put it if we don't want it to block the tunnel?
This is a pretty large paver area. Moving it a little to the, I guess that's east, isn't it? Would be possible. I will say that you don't really see the tunnel until you're off the road. That's been my experience, at least.
Because it's down?
Because it's down. So it might actually entice people to take a look at what's going on there, and then as you're looking at the kiosk, you could see that there's another area to explore.
I like the 2-sided option because I think there's a whole lot of information that can go out in that location. And then the other point I wanted to make is the 10th Avenue and Home Street route. That route a few years back was designated because it's basically just a connector from here to here, and they needed something to connect the 2 routes.
Right.
Councilor Whiting?
Thank you. You had mentioned the consortium. I know Scott County is a member of that consortium, so hopefully the signage and the same look kind of follows through. I would be concerned, I know that I talked about the size. If it's moved, then maybe that would work, but I would like to make sure that the Shakopee Town Group weighs in. We have a very active business community down there and vocal.
Okay.
So at least get them, before we put a sign in downtown, I'd like to have that at a meeting with them.
All right, thank you for that feedback.
All right, gonna take action on this? Counselor Brennan?
I make a motion to approve Scott County proposal for regional trail wayfinding.
Okay, I have a motion and
I'll
a
second
second by Counselor Whiting. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, those opposed, motion carries, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. 8A, liaison report. Counselor Brennan.
I only have one, which was the scale general meeting was held, and we presented the legislative positions to the legislatures, Brad Tapke and Senator Pratt. And that's all I have. I presented those before and told the council about those.
Well, thank you. Counselor Lehman.
SPUC had their meeting tonight because of Martin Luther King Day yesterday, so I'm double duty today. Let's see here, service line leak on Bluff that I told you about last time, that is getting repaired later this week. The resident had to line up some financing apparently, so, but that's gonna be addressed now. Dean Lake transformer number 3 has a leak. That transformer's under warranty and there's plenty of capacity, so you won't even miss it while it's getting repaired. One outage, one customer, 20 minutes, suicide squirrel. Chlorine tubing is being replaced, doing some maintenance in the wintertime. What else did I have? Oh, they're working on their SCADA system, maintenance during the wintertime also. And then pre-routine meeting, I'll give a copy of the stuff that they had. In case anybody wants it or
Thank you.
pass that down, and that's all I have.
Counselor Lehman, thank you very much. I just had a couple things. I attended with Counselor Brennan and Contreras, Municipal Legislative Commission, and that is a group of about 14 cities, similar in a couple different areas, and heard from some legislatures that are gonna, on both sides, talk about issues. I guess what I get out of it, fiscal disparities is one of the lobby points for them that they've worked on over the last couple of years, and they handed out a sheet for the member cities that are a member of that. Apple Valley, Bloomington, Burnsville, Chanhassen, Egan, Eden Prairie, Edina, Inver Grove Heights, Lakeville, Maple Grove, Minnetonka, Plymouth, Savage, Shakopee, Shoreview, and Woodbury. All combined, those cities give up $65.5 million for fiscal disparities and pay into the pool. I think it's significant for Shakopee. We do pretty well as a community because of our commercial industrial base, that we're a giver. And we lose $3.9 million as a community that we give to other communities in this fiscal disparity formula I have in the state. I'd like to build a city that is self-reliant, self-sufficient. We don't need LGA, we don't get LGA. But I certainly would like to keep the money that our tax base has developed for us, so.
That's just out of the commercial and industrial
Right.
tax
Yep,
base.
yep.
So you build a good commercial industrial, and you
Right.
pay those taxes out.
Right, so, also a lot of discussion that, on the fees from the builders group that said that cities are negatively impacting the cost of homes, which just isn't true. All the cities put out a sheet about their fees, and they range from, I don't know, 2 3/4% to what is Shakopee at, 4.5%. A lot of them do include utility fees, and that does bring ours up to 7.3. There was a memo, actually, Mr. Reynolds put this out today. I was crunching the numbers myself, because in this packet, every community has their connection charge and all that, and we line it up compared to other cities, and it seems out of whack. But that is a good group, and I'm glad we're a member of it. So, also then next week, or going to the League of Minnesota City training, coming up here, and encourage all council members to go. We never stop learning, and that's my report. Councilor Whiting.
Nothing to report. MVTA is next week.
Thank you. Councilor Contreras.
Thank you. No liaison report other than the municipal legislative commission that I attended with you and Council Brennan, and you already spoke about it. So that's it.
Okay. And our administration report, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good news yet again. The Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting has been awarded to the city of Shakopee by the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada for its comprehensive annual financial report. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in the area of governmental accounting and finance reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by a government and its management. The CAFR has been judged by an impartial panel to meet the high standards of the program, which includes demonstrating a constructive spirit of full disclosure to clearly communicate its financial story and motivate potential users and user groups to read the CAFR. So congratulations to department heads and the finance department for all their hard work on that. Once again, your hard work shines through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Moving ahead then to 8B, Councilor Lehman.
Here, I had one thing that just popped in mind. Do we want to have the DNR included in the Riverfront Trail, since that is their trail? And it would be nice to,
On the consortium.
yeah,
Other groups can be added later.
okay.
Remember?
Well, right, but since it's their trail, it'd be nice to be able to have them understand that there's areas that need tree
If they could
trimming
come
and
with some funding to
stuff, and
maintain their
that really
trail.
should be their obligation,
Right.
right? And if we're gonna put signs up on their trail easements and stuff, I mean, it'd be nice to get a go-ahead from them to have at it or have them participate.
Agreed.
They'll definitely need to be at the table as many other partners, no doubt
Okay.
about it.
All right, 8B, our bill list is in front of us for our preview. And that would bring us to number 9, other business. Is there any other business before this board? Seeing none? Counselor Lehman.
Motion to adjourn to Tuesday, February 4th, 7 PM.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Contreras, or Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned at 8:40.
Good job.
Do I get this?